Hello, I'm Robert, and this is to help those of you who are in the United States especially and are just worried about everything that's going on, and to give you some background to understand the situation. And it's particularly about what on earth's going on with Trump and Biden. How is it even possible that we don't yet know, or that Trump is still contesting Biden being president, and yet so many people are saying that he is the president to be the president-elect. So what on earth is going on here? So first of all, it's very important to understand that the United States is governed by law. It's governed by the rule of law, democracy, and its constitution. And so this is going to be sorted out by those methods. And that is why the United States, it can never be a military dictatorship. What Putin did in Russia and what Xi Jinping did in the United States, it can't be a single-party state either. It's got a constitutional democracy with a very carefully written out democracy constitution. And for instance, whoever is elected according to the Constitution in the Congress by Inauguration Day, then they are the one who's inaugurated by noon on January 20th, wherever the president is. Then the military's, their oath of office is to the president-elect, to the elected president, They do not swear an oath of office to obey the commands of Trump. So, after noon on January 20th, if Biden is president, then it doesn't matter what Trump says, because, and this is all the officers in the entire US Army, military, Air Force, everything, on the 20th of January, from then on that very minute, they no longer follow the commands of Trump. They follow the commands of Biden, if Biden is the one who's the president after that point. So there's absolutely no possibility of using the military to stay in power. And so then we have to look at what happens in the Constitution. Now, the president seems to be immensely powerful in the United States. The reason the thing to be very clear about is, though, that the president gets all his power from being the representative of the people and carrying out the wishes of the people. That's how it's understood in the Constitution. The president is carrying out the wishes of the people. He's doing it as in accord with the legislation, the laws that were produced by Congress, as interpreted by the system of justice with the Supreme Court at the top of that. And all of this is within is all as set out in the Constitution. So, if a president, for as long as he is going in accord with the laws as interpreted and within the law as interpreted by the justices, representing the people, and according with the Constitution, he has immense power. He can do huge amounts of things. But, and this is where it's so different from the CEO of a company. A CEO of a company can do almost anything, change the entire way his company operates. There isn't any constitution constraining the CEO of a company. There may be some things that have developed. You may have some constraints on him, but it's nothing like a president. And this is where Trump, I think, all the way through, right from the beginning, when he first became president, he has shown a very shaky understanding of the Constitution. He doesn't seem to understand the role of the president very well. And he seems to think president is very much like being a CEO, and it is not. So this is background that you need to have. You need to understand that. Most people in the United States will have been taught that at school, but it's easy to kind of miss it and not actually understand it very well, or skip those classes or just be vague or something about it. I'm not in the United States, I've learnt it, but interestingly, when I was at school, very unusually, when I did maths, physics and chemistry for my A-levels, that's just before you go to university, I also did a course in American history. I just, it wasn't particularly that I was interested in American history before, but I had a teacher who was a very good teacher, and many people went to him. It was just an optional class that I just went to because I was interested. So anyway, I'm no expert on this, but I've followed up and read the experts, and so I'm telling you what the experts say. I'm summarising what they say. So first of all, so the important thing is that the United States is governed by the rule of law. And this is what Liz Cheney, a very senior Republican, put it like this. America is governed by the rule of law. If they have genuine evidence of this, they are obligated to present it immediately in court and to the American people. But they have provided nothing that stands up to legal scrutiny. So for example, suppose that there's someone else in your street and he has a bit of a shitty look. He's all going like that. He's always, hunched up and looking around him wherever he goes. And you say, oh, he must have done something bad. He's got a shifty look about him. I don't like his face. He's got a strange wrinkle above somewhere on his face, and this must mean he's a bad person. And then if you went and tried and get him, and you said he's got to go to prison, I'm sure he's doing something very bad. And if you went to your local, and then you went to tried to carry out a legal case, you presented a legal case saying Joe Bloggs is a bad person, you've got to put him in prison. Because there's something about him, it's not quite right. I'm sure he's doing something wrong. Then you wouldn't get anywhere with that legal case. And if you said, oh, but I've heard so-and-so, I've heard other people saying the same thing, they all say that he's a bad person, that's not going to work at all. So it's just the same here. They need evidence. And they had lots of hearsay. These lawyers, when they took this stuff to the courts, they must have known, as professional lawyers, they must have known that they'd be rejected. They had just lots and lots of hearsay statements, and the justice could hardly believe what they were presented with. And most of them just threw it out without even reading it, reading it, but without even making a court case. So you just can't present a case where just a whole lot of people, lots and lots of people there, all saying, oh, we believe that they're doing something shifty and horrid, and that the Democrats have got this big conspiracy, and we've heard it, and we're sure of it. That is not a legal case. If people have heard of this, then you go back and find the people they heard it from. And if they aren't the original source, you go back to the ones that they heard it from. And you keep going back and back until you find the people who've actually seen it. And that's what you've got to do for a legal case. So if your client comes to you and says, oh, so-and-so has done something bad, I'm sure of it, you've got to say, well, what's your evidence? And they say, oh, I heard it from someone in the pub. You say, well, find that person and let's talk to him. So the lawyer has to do that. He has to go back and back and back until they find the original witnesses. And these lawyers haven't done that. And that's why the cases are thrown out. Or they have done that and they haven't found anyone, for whatever reason. So, and so as I explain here, of course, when the president, I'm going to go into some more details about the other thing that Trump is doing. Because legal cases have all, it doesn't look as if he's going to go any further with the legal cases at this point. They've all been thrown out. They don't seem to have a big case that they're about to. The clock has run down because the states are now certifying the votes. And you can't do anything with legal cases after they've certified the votes. It would be an absolutely extraordinary legal case to turn over a certification of a vote. The clock has run down. They should have presented their case a couple of weeks ago if they really wanted to succeed through trying to prevent the certification of the votes. So anyway, I just want to say a little bit here about that of course the if the president you're voting for is lost, you're bound to feel upset. And if you strongly upset it, or if you strongly support him, it's like grieving almost for people who are that keen on Trump. And it's very common to think that your president's lost unfairly. And in 2016, she wasn't even a sitting president, she was just a candidate. Then many supporters of Hillary Clinton thought that she had lost unfairly. And it was the same thing. They were saying, oh, she should have won. She should be inaugurated. And but what you have in the United States, the constitutional democracy, as I say there, I'm pretty much reading what I've written there, and a legal system dealing with any legal issues, and that's the way it works. And so whatever the system decides is the legal and fair result of the election. That's the definition. That is what is defined as being the legal and fair result, is whatever the system produces. And there are many different ways of organising a government. So if you were in another government, it would be done in a different way. This could have been done in different ways. But the important thing about democracy is you have a constitution, or you have an unwritten constitution in the United Kingdom, you have a system. You have it all worked out in advance. You say in advance of the vote how the vote is going to work. And then you follow that through, and you do it. And you follow what the constitution, and then you have a legal system. It's a rule of law. And then whatever is decided by that whole system is the legal and fair result of the election. That's just how a democracy works. If you are going to reject all that, you're rejecting democracy. So that's very important to realise. What is going on is democracy. And as long as you support democracy, you should support whatever president is elected by this process. And it's for us, for the residents of the United States, to give him a fair hearing, to let him do his best to be a president. And Hillary Clinton said that in her speech, very painful concession, that she'd lost it. But she urged her supporters to give Trump the opening that he needs, to support him as president, to let him be president, and let him do what he wants to do, and let him show that he can be president. And so you have to be the other way around, if you're a supporter of Trump, and let Biden show his mettle as a president, and see what his actual vision is, and let it unfold. So, and just go a little bit further. So I say I don't expect to win any arguments. I'm not trying to persuade you one way or another. I'm just telling you what's going on, helping you to understand what's actually happening. So there you are. I talked about how it needs in there. So then I'm going to talk about this bit, and I'm just going to show. BBC has a good summary here, so I'll just bring that up. This is what Trump is doing next. So he has pretty much given up on the legal cases now. They've all been thrown out. So what he's trying to do now, so the United States has these three branches of government. There's the executive, which is the president. There's Congress, which promotes the laws, which promulgates the laws, and then there's the justice system, which interprets them. So the justice system hasn't got him anywhere yet. So he's trying to go via the legislature. He's trying to get the legislature to change it. So he has to do that both within the state senates in at least 3 different states. He's got to get 3 different states, each with 10 votes or more in electoral college. So I'm hoping you understand a bit about it. Just a quick summary of how it works. The states elect electors for the electoral college. The electors then do their votes on, I think, the 8th of December. And then these votes are put in a box and sent to given to the US Congress on the 6th of January. They then open this box ceremonially, and then they count the votes, and then they declare the president on the 6th of January. And it's normally just pretty much a formality by the time you've certified the votes. But Trump is trying to find gaps in this. So one gap is faithless electors. That is people who have been, who were elected, who were selected by this process, and they pledged to vote for Biden, but then when the time comes, they vote for someone else. Now, it's very usually a faithless elector would vote for someone else in their party. For instance, instead of voting for Biden, they might vote for Bernie Sanders. But that by itself would reduce Biden's lead. But the faithless electors are very rare. There was the largest number ever was in 2016, with 7 faithless electors. That's not nearly enough. You need 37 of them. And they need them to vote for Trump instead of Biden. Or, if they were to, as explained right down to there, if they just annulled 37 of them, so if they could persuade 37 Biden voters to vote for Sanders, then that would bring it down to 2,269 votes. Once you have to have more than 270 votes to get the Electoral College, to be president. If you go below 270 votes, then it goes to the House to select, and then that's a completely different process. That is a very rare process, and Trump might have a chance with that. So that's another way, if they were to keep snipping back and back. Then basically you've got the 50 states, and each state then votes according to, each of the House of Representatives has representatives from each state, and some states have more and some states have less. But with this alternative method of going all the way down, if none of the president candidates have the majority, have more than 270, if there's no majority, then it's decided by the House, and the House decide according each of the 50 states has a vote. And then some of the votes are a mix of Republican and Democrat congressmen in the House of Representatives. So those votes cancel each other out, and they won't be counted, because you have to have anyway, it's a very complicated process. Maybe I shouldn't describe it too much, because I read a little while about it. I forget some of the details. But it turns out that some of the states wouldn't have votes, and some of the states would be Republican, some Democrat, and the Republicans would have a better chance if it could get it down to the House and require the House to vote it with just one vote for each state. But you just can't do that by the electors, because Biden is winning by 37, and after the experience of those 7 faithless electors in 2016, and both parties have been super careful. For instance, Hillary Clinton is one of the electors, and there's no way that Hillary Clinton is going to vote for anyone else except Biden. So the Democrats have been very careful in their selection of electors, and it's even less likely than in previous years. Certainly Hillary Clinton is not going to be persuaded to vote for Trump or for anyone else except Biden. So the faithless electors route, and then also the legal situation, has been greatly strengthened by a court case in July 2020, when in many states it's actually not permitted for the elector to be faithless anymore. So they can't. So Trump doesn't really have any chance by the faithless elector route. So this is his one remaining kind of Hail Mary pass, as it were. That's a term used in the United States. I mean, just you're trying out anything. It's all right, you sort of throw a thing, just throw it, and hope that it's going to score a goal from 100 feet away or something. And that's basically what Trump is trying now. And so what he's got to do now, he's trying to block the vote certification through lawsuits. That has failed. His Pennsylvania lawsuit has failed now. Pennsylvania is bound to certify on Monday, pretty certain on Monday, very soon anyway. And without Pennsylvania, he can't win. So that has basically failed. Michigan has already certified, and he also wants to turn Wisconsin. I'm not sure what's happening there, but that has failed. There's no way that they're going to stop certification. I don't think he's going to get any of the states to stop the vote certification. So now his stage 2 is to convince the Republican-controlled legislature to dismiss the results of the popular vote. So here you need to know that each state has a kind of miniature of the federal Congress. There's a little House of Senates, the House of Representatives and the Senate, and there's a little president as well, which is the governor, which is like a president in miniature for each state. So what he's got to do is to convince the Republican-controlled legislature, because they're controlled in each state. They're actually controlled by the Republican in many of the states, and he's got to convince them to dismiss the results of the popular vote. And he's got to so he's got all this hearsay and these rumours, and this didn't convince the justices, but he's got to try and use this to convince the legislature. Now the legislature, they have a free vote. Justices are very constrained. They have to have precise legal arguments. They're required to take away any personal views out of their legal decisions. The conservative justices on the Supreme Court are not voting by Republican or Democrat. They're voting. The Republicans tend to choose originalist justices because they go by the original early meaning of the law, and then that tends to favour Republican views because the country has got more liberal so as time goes on. So that's basically why why they prefer originalists. But the originalists are not going to be particularly advantageous to Trump in this particular case, because originalists will say, well, we should go by what the laws were before the votes were cast. They're not going to want to overturn the laws that have already been promulgated before the votes were cast. So he doesn't really have much progress of overturning it through appealing to originalist justices. So now he is going via various other ways. They're just not a likely avenue, and his Amy Coney Barrett is never going to go for this sort of thing. So now they have to do it via the legislatures, and they have a free vote. So if Trump could somehow convince them to overturn the popular vote, then if in their own personal conviction this is the right thing to do, then they can just vote to do that. But the problem is that much as the Republicans are very keen on Trump, many Republicans are still very keen on Trump because he's pulling power. Even if they don't agree with his views, they agree with him in every detail. They do feel that he has brought forward a Republican agenda, and that he has a lot of support in the United States at large. So they do, of course, want Trump to win, but even more than they want Trump to win, they care about democracy and the Constitution and the rule of law. And very often Republicans are especially concerned about those things. So and then to make it even worse, then in the only places where he's got a chance of pulling this off are places where there's a Republican legislature. This means that the Republicans have been in charge of the vote process. And of course they have taken great care to make sure that the votes were carried out carefully and correctly, and that there was no fraud. So the Republicans have been in these states. He's asking the Republicans in these states who have been overseeing the entire vote process. He's asking them to say that there's been massive fraud happening on their watch, under their noses. In other words, he's asking these Republican legislatures to both go against the Constitution and democracy, that is, unless they believe the fraud claims, but he has not managed to convince them of the fraud claims. So if they absolutely totally believed it, of course that would be different. But he hasn't managed to convince them of this. So he's got to persuade them to overturn, to go against the constitution and democracy and legal process. So they're going to be extremely reluctant to do that because they're conservative. And then he's going to also want them to say that under their own watch, while they've been looking at very closely at the vote counting process, that a massive fraud has happened in their state. And these frauds are absolutely massive, they would have to be. He's asking Pennsylvania, so I'll go down and look at what he's asking the Pennsylvania legislature to say. So here's that's Georgia, this is Pennsylvania. And if you look at the numbers, 3,458,000, 3,376,000, the difference is 81,813. And even Georgia, you talk about people saying Georgia was razor thin. Razor thin is like Florida with 100 votes or a few hundred votes. Georgia, the difference is 12,670, even after the recount. It was higher before the recount. These are not razor thin margins. So even in Georgia, he was asking and this is, but I'll come to that in a minute, he was asking the Georgian Republicans who have overseen the vote process to say that somehow Democrats have managed to pull off a massive fraud under their noses to flip 10,000 votes, no, 13,000 votes from Trump, or half of that, 7,000 votes if it's a flip, from Trump to Biden, and that they never saw it. And it's a massive, massive, they would, if that was true, then they don't deserve to be to their jobs anymore. He's basically telling them to vote themselves out of a job. I mean, how could you continue to continue your job if such a massive fraud has happened under your watch, with you looking closely at every vote? So it's no wonder that they don't want to go along with this. So there's two things: their respect for the Constitution and democracy, and that it would reflect so very badly on their own work, where they've actually been very careful. And Brad Raffensperger, he talks about the amount of work they've done. He talks about, he's worked as an engineer throughout my life. I live by the motto that numbers don't lie. And the numbers reflect the verdicts of people, not the decision by a Secretary of State or of courts or of other campaigns. And he's talking about how he wants to improve the current system for the future. He's a passionate conservative and a proud Trump supporter, but he's also a great believer in democracy, basically. You should have listened to that speech. So this is why the votes aren't even close. So it's going to be extremely difficult for him to carry through with this process. And Michigan have already said he has to overturn 3 different states. And Michigan have already said that they are not going to do this. And his 3 states he's targeted: Michigan, Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. Without Michigan, he's got to get all 3, so it's not going to work. So it's just not going to, that's the end of the process for him, unless he finds some other state. And so, anyway, I just thought I'd talk a little bit more about what happens next. And so, this is the full statement from the Michigan people, saying that, and they say there, it's at the end, this is the bit, that's the section. We have not yet been made aware of any information that would change the outcome of the election in Michigan, and as legislative leaders, we will follow the law and follow the normal process regarding Michigan's electors, just as we have said throughout this election. Without Michigan, Trump just doesn't have the numbers, unless he finds some other state with more than 10 electoral votes that does go along with what he said. But I hope you can begin to understand that no state is going to go along with what he said. There's no way, that it's just impossible to see how this could happen. So anyway, I'm just going to talk a little bit more about what would happen. This is just very highly theoretical about what would happen, suppose. So we're talking really about an alternative a mirror universe, a different parallel universe, not this one. It's just impossible in this universe. But in some parallel universe, just suppose that you found a whole lot of legislators who are willing to say, oh, we made a huge mistake, there's been massive fraud on our watch. Somehow managed to miss 83,000, what was the number? 83,000 or 80, let's have a look at we somehow managed to miss 81,000, nearly 82,000 votes, and the Democrats managed to flip 82,000 votes under our noses and we didn't see it. And he managed to convince 3 different states like that. Suppose that did happen, then he's still not there, because just like the president is the executive of the country, then in each state the governor is the executive of the state. He's like a little president, as I said. So it turns out that the person who takes the electoral college votes adds it to this box that I told you about is the governor. So he's got to try and persuade the governor to, instead of picking the governor, of course, is Democrat in Pennsylvania, and I think in all 3. Certainly, I haven't checked the other 2, but certainly in Pennsylvania, and he has to have Pennsylvania to have any chance. The governor is Democrat. And how is he going to persuade a Democrat governor to pick up the electoral college votes that are submitted by a Republican legislature instead of the ones that have gone through the proper certification and legal process? So that's not going to work. So what would happen next in this highly hypothetical scenario, that is not going to happen at all anyway, is that the Democrat governors put the certified vote and give that. And then the Republican legislature would have to have a separate submission, their own little box. And they say, but this is what you should accept for Pennsylvania. And they have a little box of how many votes they have for Pennsylvania, I forget the number. And so they'd have a little box of, is it 16 votes? I can't remember now, the number of votes. And so there'd be a little box, there'd be the big box that they're all counting, there'd be another little box. And then there'd be Republicans saying, this is what you've got to count instead when you get to Pennsylvania. And obviously in the House, which is Democrat controlled, they would never go with that. So their only hope would be to persuade the Republicans in the Senate to go with that. And the Senate has a razor-thin margin. If the Georgia Senate elections go through on the 5th of January, and I'm not sure if they would stand for the next day, but they would need to be both be Republicans and, no, they need to be one Republican and one Democrat. It's most likely, but it's possible they're both Democrats, so we don't know yet. And so I think it doesn't really matter whether they are able to vote the next day or not. But either way, I think by the time it gets there, Pence would still be the vice president, so he would still be the leader of he's called the president of the Senate, I think. So he would be able to deal with any tie, and there would be one person majority for the Republicans in the Senate at that point, before the Georgia, and then if the Georgia both went Democrat, then it's a tie. But either way, Pence would swing it. So if Trump could persuade both Pence and every single Republican in the Senate to support him, then that is when he would be able to override in the Senate, but not in the House. But that's not going to work, because many high-profile senators have already said that they're not going to go with this. And I can't see even Mitch McConnell, the leader of the Republicans in the Senate, I can't see him going with this. He's already said that he's going to go by the rule of law. I can't see Mitch McConnell supporting this. So it's not going to go through the Senate. It wouldn't go through, even in this mirror universe, parallel universe, it's not going to go through the Senate. But just suppose, just take it to the very last little bit of what would happen if it went all the way to that. And then suppose that somehow Trump managed to convince everyone, including Mitch McConnell, and including Susan Collins, and including every single senator in the Senate was convinced that something massive and absolutely awful had gone on, and so as a result they then all supported this. Then you have a split in Congress between the House and the Senate, and that would have to be resolved in the Supreme Court. And so when you get to the Supreme Court, then the Supreme Court would be extremely reluctant because they believe very strongly in the separation of powers, but they would be forced to take part. And then they would have from the 6th of January 2 weeks until the 20th to decide this case. And they probably only decided on the 19th. Be very rushed, but they would do it. And it then all hangs on a single punctuation mark. So it turns out that whether they use whoever framed the relevant act put a full stop, and one legal scholar, so just one legal scholar out of many, has said that they should have put a semicolon there if they meant to imply that the legislature can't override the governors. And then the others say, oh no, it's absolutely clear that the governors override in this context. So the Supreme Court justice then would be arguing over this, and it's not an originalist, non-originalist thing. And it's just one legal scholar thinks there's a possibility it could be argued that way. Most legal scholars don't go with this. So it's a minority amongst legal scholars, and it seems extremely improbable that you get a 5-4 majority in the Supreme Court. I think you'd be lucky to get just one Supreme Court justice would agree that that because he put a full stop instead of a semicolon, because the framers of this bill, this act put a full stop instead of a semicolon, that therefore it's permissible to throw out what the governor said. So the very worst case goes all the way through to the eve of inauguration, and then almost certainly gets thrown out then. So but as I said, all that's in a parallel universe. That's not going to happen in this universe. It's not going to even get as far as the Senate. It's not going to even get as far as, I think, even one state overturning the legislature. It's just not going to happen. So I hope this is clear, and this is just reality check. The United States is governed by law, and I just want to help with all these people who are just so anxious, either Biden supporters who think that Trump can continue to be president, and maybe even think that he could do it with the war or something. And then you have the Trump supporters who are desperate for him to be president. And it's a bit like when someone's died and you say, oh, so-and-so didn't die, they're still alive. It's not right. It's not compassionate to do that. If someone has died, they died, and it's not compassionate to tell someone that they're still alive. And in the same way, it's not compassionate to tell someone that Trump is going to be inaugurated when it's absolutely certain that he won't be. There's no possibility at all. And then just to go through these, I'll go through the legal cases here. You can read them up. I'm not going to talk about them now. But and you say that quite a few think that it was a rigged election, but I hope you can understand now that this is your legal process. This is how your democracy in action, and it's not rigged, because you have to establish something like that through the law, and it hasn't been established. So Biden is the president-elect through your democracy, working as it has. And then if you think these are some things so I know that some of you will have watched all of this all the way as far as I got to now, and will still be saying, this is not true, he's liberal. So first of all, I want to say a little bit about myself. Okay, I'm in the United Kingdom, and we care about United States foreign policy, and people around the world care much more about the foreign policy and about things like the Paris Agreement and WHO. We are not personally impacted in any way by Medicare or about minimum wage, or what the other thing? Oh, and weapons. I mean, in Europe, nobody's even interested in having weapons. So, and abortion, then it's not a political matter here in the United Kingdom either. We don't have candidates that run on that as an election issue. So none of the domestic, and what happens in the United States, is for the United States people to sort out, and it doesn't impact on us. So what impacts on us are foreign policy decisions, and many people outside the United States have been very badly impacted by Trump's foreign policy decisions, and that is why it's not because he's Republican. So Reagan was an example of a Republican president who was widely supported outside the United States because of what he did with the Cold War, and basically he is mainly responsible for ending the Cold War from his rapport with Gorbachev. So if we were back then we would be supporting the Republicans because of their Republican very good foreign policy. But Trump was Republican with a foreign policy that is pretty much universally disliked outside the United States. With starting off with the Muslim ban, then NATO withdrawing, being so polarized from NATO. You see these pictures of Trump standing one side and all the NATO leaders in another place, because I'm not even talking to them. And and the INF treaty, and the withdraw from the Iran deal, which nobody in Europe thinks he should have withdrawn from, and just none of the governments. I mean, probably some individual people, but none of the governments. And it's just one thing after another, and then withdrawing from the Paris Agreement and withdrawing from WHO, and nobody outside the United States, and really, except perhaps Bolsonaro in Brazil, would agree with withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, and nobody outside the United States agrees with the United States withdrawing from the WHO. So that is why there's so much support for Biden and opposition to Trump, because we don't have the domestic perspective. The big domestic issues that are the reason why Trump supporters are so energized in supporting him just don't affect us. But I'm certainly, I'm not particularly Democrat. And for example, with Obama, I have the opposite view. So with Obama, to start off with, I was very keen on Obama. And some of the things he's done were excellent, such as the Paris Agreement. However, as you can understand from my blog posts, I'm a very strong believer in law, legal processes, that things are done properly. And with Obama's, the drone strikes in Pakistan, I think were outrageous. Basically, Obama was directing people to kill what are people who are identified as being militants or terrorists from aerial photographs. And basically the people who press that button are judge, executioner. There's no justice, there's no court of law was involved. It was not a war situation. The United States is not at war with Pakistan. Pakistan has its own legal process. Pakistan could have gone and arrested them if they had real case against them. And then what's more, especially the infamous double tap, where they would kill them and then have another explosion afterwards, which would kill the civilians who came to try and rescue the people who were injured by the first explosion. So that is totally against any legal way of thinking, according to me. I think that was absolutely appalling, and he totally lost my support with that. And then Obama also lost my support with the way that they attacked Osama bin Laden. Because Osama bin Laden he didn't have any weapons. He was unarmed. He was at home, unarmed, or in the building, unarmed. They stormed this place, and then they killed him. And there was no need to kill him. They could have taken him prisoner. There was absolutely nothing in that situation to require that they had to kill him. It was basically an execution, remotely. And I feel very strongly, as many human rights people believe, that I was totally wrong. And it doesn't matter what he did, he deserved proper process of law. And they should have captured him and taken him through the legal process. So so although there's much that Obama did that was good, for me, he lost me at that point. And so I no longer supported Obama after that. But I don't think that Biden is like that. So I'm very hopeful that I don't think Biden is the sort of person who would do those things. So people are not, just because he was with the Obama presidency doesn't mean that he supported everything that Obama did. And I think Biden is going to be a very popular president in my view. I didn't know much about him I didn't know anything about him back then. He just was very much in the shadows from as far as people outside the United States. Never on the news as I remember. But what has come up about him since then, I think he's going to be a very good president. He's going to be very good at bridging the between the Republicans, very middle of the road. He's not as far left as Obama was. He's very middle of the road. He talks to people. He's very compassionate. He cares about people. That's come very clear. And what we need at the moment with COVID-19, then we need people who respect science. So now in the United Kingdom, our government, in my view, does not respect science. Trump didn't respect science. That is very obvious with him attacking his science advisors and saying the opposite. And then when the CDC produced their big report, their big four-stage plan for how to exit from lockdowns, it was excellent. But then Georgia wants to do something different, and Trump immediately supported Georgia. And he didn't even say that actually this plan that I've got is much better than what you're planning. I know the states have a lot of independent capability of action, but Trump didn't even support and promote the CDC plan. He did on the first day, but after that he just ignored it. And he did many other anti-science things. So in the United Kingdom it was the same. So in the United Kingdom we have the SAGE working group. And when the composition was eventually revealed, it turned out that they're nearly all modelers. They don't have a single virologist. So they didn't have anyone who understands the biology of viruses. They don't have anyone in this group who is a logistics expert, which is very vital for this sort of thing. And they don't have a single epidemiologist in the group. And these people in the United Kingdom are making the decisions in secret. Now, you do have need for secrecy sometimes in medical situations, clinical secrecy of the patients. And then also the WHO, then they have a lot of information from some of the foreign governments they're talking to that they can't reveal because they talk to them privately. So you do have things like that. But it's not anything like that SAGE keeps secret. It's just their deliberations, their reasoning. They have these preprints that they only produce later as a kind of justification after they've made the action. So it is, in my view, the way it is conducted is deeply anti-science, even anti-science. So my own personal view. So these they conduct it very well within their own personal disciplines of modelling or whatever it is. But but they then try and use that to do a review of the entire scientific literature without involving anyone outside their group, without making it open, without opening their discussions to peer review, and then at the same time, there are many experts in the United Kingdom right from the beginning. The very moment that we moved from the contain to delay phase, there were experts just shouting out and saying, no, that's not right, you mustn't do that. And they just weren't listening to them. So, in my view, the way the United Kingdom has done it was deeply anti-scientific, and it remains anti-scientific all the way through. And just now it still is. The way they're doing contact tracing, right from the top at the national level, so they implement it from the national levels, telling it they have the script that people have to read out. It is not developed in response to trying small teams of contact tracers, learning from them, learning what works, developing a system that works, feedback back and forth, like in other countries. It is worked out theoretically by these modeler type people as we think this would work, and this is the list of questions you've got to ask these people, and then you've got to go through that list in exactly that order and ask them exactly the same things, whoever worked it out. And so we are in this bizarre situation in the United Kingdom where our contact tracing is basically not working. The best contact tracing is done by local authorities, but the local authorities in the United Kingdom, they're only allowed to ring up people that the national team can't ring. They then ring these people up, and they'll ring someone up at home, and they'll say, do you have any contacts? They say, oh yes, my mother is a contact, and my child is a contact, and my partner is a contact. And so then the natural thing would be, okay, can I speak to them and give them advice about what they need to do as a contact? But they're not permitted to do that. Our local authorities then are not permitted to follow up contacts. So even though they're on the phone and the other people are in the same room, they're not permitted to talk to them. It's just red tape gone mad. They have to instead send a message up to the national team. Then once that point, the national team now have the contact details, so it's the local authorities now can't be involved in the case anymore. And the national team then go through the exact same script with the mother, father, the grandparents and the grandchildren, and each one of those, they go through the exact same script, the same questions in the same order, and these households in the United Kingdom get totally fed up by this. They get and then they get repeat calls from the national centre who's supposed to follow up. And so they get maybe 30 calls, all saying exactly the same things, going through the same questions in the same order. And then they say, I've answered that before. And then people say, and they're very nice, kind people at the other end, but they say, sorry, but I have to ask these questions, it's on my script and I'm not permitted to do anything else, please bear me out. And that is the absolutely bizarre situation we are in the United Kingdom. We're deeply anti-scientific. Now, Biden is not going to do that in the United States. The United States has excellent contact tracers. They know how to do it, especially at Johns Hopkins University. They have wonderful training materials for contact tracers, showing how to do it properly. If you're interested, I very much suggest you try taking the course on contact tracing at the Johns Hopkins University. It's a free, open course that you can do online and learn a lot about how it should be done. The United Kingdom would do a much better job of contact tracing if they used the Johns Hopkins free open course to train their contact tracers. And then if they were to permit the local authorities to do the contact tracing and just the national team have some role or other, but most of it is done in the local authority. So anyway, the United States has a much better approach to contact tracing, at least in some of the states. And Biden is going to one of the first things he's going to do is employ a team of 100,000 United States Americans to contact tracing. So that's 2,000 more contact tracers in every state. And probably more in some than in others. That's one of the early things he's going to do. He's also going to ramp up testing. So Joe Biden is going to make sure the testing is done very quickly and you have a very quick turnaround, because contact tracing doesn't work unless you have a quick turnaround, like within 24 hours ideally. So Joe Biden, I think, is the one to get it to work in the United States, and he's going to show the United Kingdom how to do it. He's very keen on contact tracing. He's telling everyone to do the physical distance. He's going to be doing the mask wearing. He's going to be a public figure. So in the world, up to Inauguration Day, and so we're just starting now with Biden on the television about the COVID-19. Trump is just not even talking about it most of the time. So we're already getting a more consistent message, because Biden is saying the same as the WHO, is saying the same as all the other countries. That's just about all the other countries. So people around the world, I think, are influenced by this clash between what Trump is saying and all these, and because we are social animals, we're herd animals, and so I think people are influenced by just seeing on television all these people without the physical distancing and not wearing masks. And so in the future, as we have week after week where they are doing the physical distancing and are wearing masks, and then we get the people in the United States doing contact tracing properly and getting people to quarantine and isolate properly. And then we've seen this really, the science really works. Jacinda Ardern was the best proponent that we have in the West. And Joe Biden has the same as she of being able to talk directly to people through the camera, as it were, talking directly to the people who are listening to him. And with his own experience of loss, he has lost his first wife and I forget, one of the children, and then he lost another child. He's got very personal experience of loss, and he's come through, and he talks directly from that own experience to knowing the people that he's talking to, that many of them have lost loved ones through COVID-19. And he's telling them, and he can talk from his own experience what it's like to lose a loved one suddenly, unexpectedly. That was just a traffic accident. And he has this same way of him. It's like Jacinda Ardern, talking directly to them as people from his heart. So I think that Joe Biden is going to be the president. If any president is going to do it, he's going to be the president, both healing across aisle. He works very well across aisle. He has many friends who are Republicans. And also, he seems to be just the right person for COVID-19. So I hope, even if you're a Republican, I hope you can, not just Republican, but also a very strong Trump supporter, I hope this helps you just feel a bit better about Biden being president. And many of the things that were told in the campaigns, Biden does not want to force all of you to have tiny, tiny windows. Nobody even knows where that came from. That he said in one of the presidential debates. It's not in any policy, even like Bernie Sanders' kind of green climate change thing, but it wouldn't be in there either. It just doesn't make sense. If you're talking about insulation, then you have double glazing or triple glazing with argon in between the two panes of glass. That's how you ensure that your windows are insulating if you're in a cold part of the world. You don't need to have tiny windows. So anyway, so now I'm just going to end with a few things, for I know that there will be some of you who have listened to this all the way through and you still are absolutely sure that Trump is going to be inaugurated on January the 20th, because about 5%, so I would, on average, of people outside the United States, I would say almost nobody believes this, but in the United States, 1 in 20, so probably 1 in 40 or 50 or something, assuming half of my viewers are from the United States, will still at this point be absolutely certain that Trump is going to be inaugurated on the 20th. So just give you a few more things to think over. So first of all, Rudy Giuliani's claim is that Democrats have so I'm not expecting this to convince you, but just something to think over. So he claims that Democrats have a conspiracy which have successfully flipped tens of thousands of votes in favour of Biden, 30,000, sorry, that should say over 50,000 in the case of Michigan, because you only have to flip half of them. I will correct that. So, and you have to flip 40,000 in Pennsylvania. So a massive, massive conspiracy. Nobody has ever achieved anything like that. In fact, so attempts at electoral fraud are very common. Success at electoral fraud is very rare. Only a few votes ever successfully get flipped through electoral fraud. So then the question is, first of all, if the Democrats did successfully flip so many votes, 50,000 in Michigan, 40,000 in Pennsylvania and so on, then why didn't they perform so well in the Senate, where they are close to losing it? They may well have lost their majority in the Senate. It's the same ballot, it's all one big ballot. If they can flip Biden, they can surely flip the Senate. Why didn't they? And why didn't they flip the local legislature, the Republicans, to control the legislature in many of these, in all except one? They only managed to flip one legislature in the battleground states from Republican to Democrat. Now this is extremely important right now, because in 2021, the United States is going to be doing its redistricting, choosing what the districts are. And this is going to affect the Democrats and the Republicans in the next election. It doesn't affect the popular vote. It doesn't affect the Senate. I think it affects the House of Representatives. That they're going to and the local Congress. So anyway, why did the Democrats not flip the local legislature? It doesn't make sense. Because, and the reason is, if you're not in the United States, you might be there's the practice of gerrymandering. So if you have like a big Democrat district and then a Republican district, then you can kind of, by flipping it through between the two, you can ensure that you could ensure that there's a slight majority of Democrats in every district. If you wanted to flip it for Democrats, then you would ensure that you could say you've got 100,000 Democrats and you've got 100,000 Republicans, then normally you would get half of each. But what you would do is you take the 100,000 Democrats and you redistrict them in little groups, so that there'd be one very strongly Republican group. Just you make one district just Republican, and all the rest of the districts of the Republicans, then you would make them partly into a Democrat district with the majority Democrat. And that way you can ensure that all the districts in this hypothetical example are Democrat except one, which is Republican. And in that way you can hugely skew the votes. So this is legal in the United States. And it's not legal in other countries, in some other countries. In some of the states in the United States it's not legal. They have an independent, in some of the states, they have an independent organisation that does the redistricting. And they do it independent of any party considerations. But in some of the states, including some battleground states, then the legislature do the redistricting, and they can skew and improve their own electoral chances and the House of Representatives for the next election. And this is going to happen in 2021. Why didn't the Republicans, if there was this massive conspiracy, why didn't they flip the local legislatures? It doesn't make sense. And then finally, is it credible that the US electoral system is vulnerable to massive voter fraud to the extent of tens or even 100,000 votes by Democrat voters, yet not by Republican voters and not by foreign powers. Why wasn't the conspiracy amongst Republicans, not necessarily the top-up ones, but local people, just people who sort of said, "Oh, I want the Republicans to win." If there can be some Democrats do that, there can surely be some Republicans who want to do that. So you get fraud both ways. It's not only Democrats who try fraud; Republicans try it too. So why was it so vulnerable to Democrats? And yet not to Republicans? What is it about Democrats that makes them more able to defraud than Republicans? And especially bearing in mind that Trump was the president leading up to it, so if there was something that was a unique vulnerability to Democrats or something specific that could be fixed, like they talk about the Dominion voting software, why didn't he do something about that before? So I'll say up here, there's no evidence at all that the Dominion voting software did anything. It was the top cybersecurity official of the CISA. He said he quoted a law expert saying, "Please don't retweet wild and baseless claims about voting machines." So that's about voting machines, and it's also about the Dominion software. There are plenty of Republicans saying it's baseless, but anyway. So anyway, Trump himself, he did this tweet. Trump said this: "The only thing secure about our 2020 election was that it was virtually impenetrable by foreign powers. On that, the Trump administration takes great credit. Unfortunately, the radical left, Democrats, Dominion and others were perhaps more successful." So, the Trump administration takes great credit for making it virtually impenetrable by foreign powers. If the Trump administration was so good at making the voting system impenetrable to foreign powers, why didn't they make it impenetrable to Democrats? That is the basic question. So that's the last thing I want you to think about if you are one of these people who think there was a massive conspiracy. And then just one final thing. If you're one of these 5%, and just wait for this to pop up. Let's pop down a bit. Why was Trump doing this? Why did Trump spend his weekends off golfing if he was right in the middle of I'm not sure, is that Trump? I think it might be. He's centred, so presumably he is. So why did Trump, if he was in the middle of the biggest scandal in US election history and the biggest legal case of his entire career, why did he spend 2 days every week, and 1 week I think it was 3 days, out golfing at the weekends, and I think it was one non-week, I'm not sure. Anyway, certainly both days each weekend. And he even passed up, just this Sunday, there was this big conference about COVID-19, it was one of the G20 summit, and he spent his time golfing instead of being on the G20 summit. So why is he spending so much time golfing instead of doing presidential things, where surely, if he thinks he's going to be president after the 20th, surely he should be doing presidential things. And why, even if he was focusing all his time on the legal case, and that was why he had to skip the G20 summit, then why did he go off golfing? So there's a certain lack of commitment on his side. It doesn't really seem that he is putting it all in to try to support this supposed legal case. He's leaving it to his lawyers, and his lawyers are producing things that just get thrown out by one justice after another. So, as I say, I don't expect this to change your views, and some of you, having gone through all of this, will still be absolutely certain that Trump's going to be inaugurated on January 20th. I can't change that, but I hope that this gave any of you gave some of you who did have uncertainty and worries about this to be somewhat clear about what's going on in the United States, and to understand that it's not some kind of liberal plot, and that so many people are saying that Biden is the president-elect. It's just the way your constitution and your legal system works. It's just extremely hard to see, it just... Anyway, I've told you everything. You can go and look up the details again on this. I'll put this on the post. So think about what I've said and decide for yourself. And what you think is really going on there, and what you think is really going to happen. That's it.